There were various methods employed in the Middle Ages for the destruction of a town. Water supplies could be cut off or poisoned. It'd be difficult in the case of Harfleur because a river runs through it. So that's probably off the table. Water supplies could be cut off or poisoned. Buildings set alight in the hope that fires would spread throughout the town. The town could be blockaded to prevent food from entering. The walls could be overrun by large numbers of troops using scaling ladders and battering rams on the gates. And cannon and other siege engines could be used to smash down the walls. Harfleur was a difficult prospect, whichever method Henry chose. The volume of water flowing through the town, despite the closure of the sluices to flood the valley to the north, made it difficult to cut off the water supply. The Barbicans prevented any direct attack on the gates, and an attempt to scale the walls would inevitably lead to a massive loss of life. Henry's own ordinances prohibited burning, because Henry wanted the town, right? He sort of wanted and needed it. He considered it his. If he burnt it to the ground, completely destroyed it, well, that's no good, right? What's the point in liberating somewhere if it's completely levelled? And also, Henry wants to make the argument that he's not here purely to just annihilate every Frenchman and burn every French town to the ground. He's here to, again, to sort of liberate them. He's making the argument that he is the king of France. He's the rightful king of France. So it's not really on, is it? It's not really cricket to just be going around massacring everyone in his way and destroying every building in his way if he is the legit king of France. So, yeah, the idea of just burning it to the ground is sort of off the cards, or at least in Henry's mind, that's sort of the tactical decision he's made. Mortimer continues, and even though he could have rescinded these instructions, the town would not have been worth possessing if he had burnt it to the ground. His model for a successful siege was Henry III's siege of Calais, which had been effected by a combined landward and seaward blockade, both of which Henry had already put in place. However, it had taken Edward III 11 months to starve Calais into submission, and Henry did not have 11 months to spare. He could not afford such a long campaign, nor could he risk a battle before the walls with an oncoming French army without a port from which he could retreat. Henry chose to deploy his heavy guns from the outset, having cleared, just to say, we are in the age of cannon now, but it's early on. Cannon are very sort of rudimentary still. The ranges aren't all that long. The force of the cannon are sort of nothing compared to modern cannon or even sort of 19th century cannon. You can't fire a big cannon very often because it overheats. The science of it isn't really worked out. Often cannon are likely to just explode on the spot rather than shoot their projectile out the front accurately. But nonetheless, we do have cannon. So that's a thing. And our Henry V has decided that he's going to lean into it. His father, Henry IV, was a big fan of cannon. In fact, I think Mortimer goes on to tell us all about that, so I'll let him continue. Having cleared the last buildings from the suburbs, the great iron-bound cannon blasted stones of 400 to 500 pounds at the defences. Now, that's a massive cannonball, right? 400 to 500 pound cannonball. Quick thing to say, though, is that they're stone cannonballs, not metal ones. Again, the science of making a perfectly round cannonball is just not there yet. There's a whole science behind making perfectly round cannonballs, out of metal, I mean. To make a perfectly round cannonball, and it needs to be almost perfectly round, otherwise it can destroy the cannon. Yeah, there's a whole science behind that, which in the early 15th century, they haven't mastered, or even really begun, really. So cannonballs were made out of stone, and even that is very hard to make perfectly round, or as close to perfectly round as you can get. And you never know that the piece of stone you're using might have sort of internal fissures or might not be perfect inside. When you go to fire it, it just blows up. So being an artilleryman in the 15th century is a very hazardous thing. So yeah, it's quite a primitive thing. Nonetheless, the big cannon, of which he's only got one or two here, will throw out a 400 to 500 pound cannonball. Now, even at relatively low velocities, that's still going to do massive damage, right? If you can accelerate a 400 or 500 pound piece of stone up to a few hundred miles per hour, that's devastating still. But okay, so just to make the point, we're in the very, very early stages of artillery here. Mortimer goes on, although there were a large number of cannon in the English arsenal in England, Henry had brought no more than a dozen with him, and perhaps fewer. These monsters weighed up to 2 tons and could only fire at a very low rate. But when they did fire and struck the target, the effect was devastating. One stone hitting a castle tower could easily bring the whole edifice crashing down. Henry's father had been at the cutting edge of gunnery technology, designing cannon himself and deploying them with great effectiveness in his sieges. At Warkworth in 1405, he had forced the defenders to surrender after one of his great guns had fired 7 times. Shortly afterwards, at Berwick, he had demolished the external walls of the castle with small cannon, and then, with a single shot from one of his great guns, had blown apart one of the towers, after which the defenders surrendered. This was the technology that Henry himself now proposed to use to reduce the town of Harfleur, and show that a siege that took Edward III 11 months could be accomplished by his men in a few days. Henry did not just bring up his guns, he built deep ditches and earth ramparts around them to defend the gunners and other men shooting at the walls. In front of each cannon he positioned a screen made of heavy planks of wood. These were hinged at their midpoints on each side, so that when the top was tilted back, the lower parts allowed the cannon to blast a stone towards a selected target. Similar defences were placed directly opposite the strongest barbican to allow an around-the-clock watch to be stationed there, in case the enemy should attack from it. Those digging the protective ditch around this defence continued excavating day after day, thereby making a trench that almost reached the water in front of the Port Lure. And then the gunners, 25 of them, including 4 master gunners and 50 assistants, were instructed to destroy the town walls, to destroy the barbicans, and to fire indiscriminately into the centre of the town, to kill the inhabitants and to demoralise the enemy. Meanwhile, Henry sent a message to the Duke of Brittany to make sure that their truce still held good. As he knew, it was all very well having alliances with subjects of the King of France before the fighting started. Whether they would actually support him with men and arms, now that they could see their services would be required, was a totally different issue. Henry had obviously given similar instructions to his brother and the Chancellor before leaving England, as the Duke of Bedford was set to publish, on the 20th, the next day, the truce with which the Duke of Burgundy at Dartmouth, Plymouth and Exeter. When that was done, the embassy led by John Hovingham and Simon Fleet would leave London, with powers to renegotiate a new alliance with the Duke of Brittany. They would remain there, reminding the Duke of his diplomatic obligations until Henry left France. End quote. So the Duke of Brittany, obviously, if you know northern France, we'll put a map up. Brittany is right there. So Henry absolutely needs the Duke of Brittany to sort of not get involved, if possible. And so sort of all political and diplomatic measures are employed to make sure that remains the case. Another quick thing to say, I think at this point, about cannons, is that I often think of myself, most people, most historians, most people that enjoy strategy games or war games or anything like that, often would think themselves, if I was sort of quantum leaped back in time to the early medieval period or something like that, and I was king, what I would do is start something like in what we in the modern age would call a research and development program. What I would do is get all the cleverest men together, all the greatest sort of smiths and iron workers and chemists together in the land, put them all in one place, probably somewhere in London, and get them to work out all the science of gunnery. I'd get them to design and build many, many guns and cannons, get them to perfect the science of manufacturing cannons as best possible, and the science around gunpowder, making better, more efficient versions of gunpowder. Well, something similar did occur to loads of people at the time. They might not have lent into it as much as they should in hindsight, as much as I would have if I was quantum leaped back to the 15th or 16th century or something. But still, nonetheless, they don't. I mean, Henry IV did something similar. Henry VIII does something similar. The leaders of places like Venice do something similar. The Turkish Sultan does do something similar. They realise that this is the future of warfare. If you can get it really good, right? If we could create giant cannons that can batter down walls easily, well, we only need 1 or 2 of those, And if we can get them to sort of not blow up, and if we can get them to do longer and longer ranges, get them to smash into their targets with greater and greater force, well, whoever's got that at their disposal is the winner. So, you know, let's do that. Well, it did occur to people at the time. Yeah.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.